Welcome back, everybody. Today's deep dive is going to be, a little unnerving, honestly. We're going deep into the world of AI, but with a bit of a twist. We're not talking about, self-driving cars or those algorithms that recommend like a million cat videos on YouTube.
Mm.
This is about AI products that could pose some serious security risks, especially those coming out of China. I mean, think about it. AI is everywhere now, like the software that helps keep traffic moving smoothly, or even the tech that helps doctors make diagnoses. It's kind of wild how much we depend on AI without even realizing it.
It is, yeah. AI is not some abstract thing anymore. It's embedded in the way our world works.
Right.
But while it has this huge potential to do good, it also brings up some unique challenges when it's developed in a country with different values and interests than democracies.
Yeah, you're right. We can't just ignore that geopolitical side of things. That's exactly why we're diving into this policy brief today. It's called De-Risking Authoritarian AI, a balanced approach to protecting our digital ecosystems. And it's written by Simeon Gilding. He's a senior fellow at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. And he really makes you think about why we need to be paying attention to this.
Yeah, Gilding's background is especially relevant here. He was the Deputy Director General of the Australian Signals Directorate, which means he was in charge of signals intelligence and offensive cyber operations. So he knows this stuff inside and out.
Okay, so let's get into it. This paper really zooms in on China's influence in the AI world. What's pushing them to become such a big player?
But China's AI strategy is driven by both economic and security goals. They see AI as a way to dominate future industries and make their military stronger. But it's bigger than that. They're also using AI to, control information and people within their own borders,
Yeah.
like their social credit system. They use AI to track and rate people's behavior.
Wow, that's a pretty stark contrast to how democracies view individual rights. So you have this clash of values playing out in the AI space, which is kind of worrying.
Exactly. Gilding points out three main risks connected to AI that's developed in authoritarian countries:
Hmm.
espionage and sabotage, foreign interference, and the threat from these new generative AI systems.
Okay, let's break those down, starting with espionage and sabotage. I mean, that sounds like something straight out of a spy movie. What are we talking about in real life?
Gilding uses some very specific examples. One that really stands out is the case of ship-to-shore cranes. A Chinese company called ZPMC controls a crazy 70% of the global market for these cranes.
70%, that's huge. I can see why that would make people nervous from a national security standpoint.
Yeah, and they've installed these cranes in ports all over the place, including really important ones in the US and Australia. These aren't just, big hunks of metal. They have all these sensors and software built in that monitor container movements. They're collecting tons of data on what's coming in and out of a country.
So the worry is that this data could be used for spying, maybe even revealing secrets about military shipments or trade.
Exactly. And it's not just about snooping either. These systems could be attacked and sabotaged. Imagine the chaos if those networks got hacked and those cranes suddenly stopped working. It would cripple global supply chains.
That's a scary thought. Are there other examples of this kind of vulnerability?
Another one is security screening equipment, like in airports and other important facilities. A Chinese company called Nuctech dominates that market. They supply scanners and equipment to loads of countries. The worry here is similar: access to data and the chance of disruption. These systems are often linked to databases with passenger information, cargo manifests, you name it.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading that the US and Canada have actually banned some Nuctech equipment because of these security concerns. So it's not just a theory. Governments are dealing with this right now.
Absolutely. And those are just two examples. Gilding also talks about the risks of Chinese companies like Huawei. They build digital infrastructure for things like railway networks. Again, the same concerns pop up: data access, surveillance, and the potential for disruption.
It sounds like we're relying more and more on technology that could be used against us. What about India? Gilding uses them as a case study. What makes them stand out?
India's in a tough spot. They're a fast-growing country with a huge need for infrastructure, and they've been depending a lot on Chinese companies in tech to meet that need. But at the same time, the relationship with China is complicated. There are border disputes and a history of cyber attacks that have been linked to China.
So they're really vulnerable, depending on tech from a country that also poses a threat.
Exactly. And there was an example that shows just how vulnerable they are. There were these cyber attacks on India's power grid, and they were traced back to China. It shows what can happen when AI-enabled infrastructure is used for malicious purposes. It's a warning sign,
Yeah.
not just for India, but for all democracies.
It definitely seems like we need to be extra careful with all this. But it can't all be bad news. Gilding offers some solutions, right? What does he say about managing these risks without completely shutting down collaboration and innovation?
Gilding's not saying we should just ban all Chinese technology. That wouldn't be practical, and it would hurt us economically. Instead, he suggests a framework for dealing with the most serious risks.
Okay, so it's more about being strategic and not just freaking out. What's this framework all about?
He has this three-step process: audit, red team, and regulate. The first step is to identify the high-risk AI systems. We need to figure out which systems are the biggest threats to things like critical infrastructure and sensitive information, based on what they do, how they work, and what kind of access they have.
So basically figuring out where we're most vulnerable. What's next?
The second step is red teaming. This is where you bring in special teams with expertise in intelligence and cybersecurity to really dig into those systems that are like ethical hackers, looking for weaknesses and ways those systems could be exploited.
Oh, I see. So find the weak spots and figure out how to fix them. Makes sense. And then the last step is regulation.
Right. Regulation is where you come up with specific measures to reduce the risks. This could mean banning certain technologies in really sensitive areas, putting stricter rules in place for government purchases, or even launching public awareness campaigns to educate people about the dangers.
So the regulations would be tailored to the specific risks that were found earlier. That seems smarter than just trying to ban everything.
Exactly. It's about being strategic and thoughtful, not just reacting out of fear. And Gilding goes even further. He also talks about the importance of international standards and global partnerships.
Let's talk about those. What can international standards do to help with this?
Think about it. What if we had global standards for AI development? Standards that include democratic values and security considerations right from the start.
So we'd be setting the rules of the game, making sure that AI is developed responsibly no matter where it comes from.
Exactly. It would change our whole approach. Instead of reacting to threats, we'd be building security and ethical considerations into AI systems from the ground up. We'd be creating a level playing field that encourages innovation, but also protects our values.
That sounds great in theory. But how do you get everyone to agree? Especially countries that might not share those same values.
It's definitely a challenge, but I think more and more people around the world are realizing that AI needs to be developed responsibly, regardless of political systems. No one wants to see AI used for bad things or to cause instability.
So we all have a shared interest in preventing things from getting out of control. But even with good intentions, we need ways to cooperate and enforce these standards. That's where global partnerships come in, right?
Absolutely. Democracies need to work together to share information, coordinate their responses, and stand together against the threats posed by authoritarian AI. We're much stronger when we work together.
Strength in numbers. I like that. Gilding also mentions stronger legal frameworks. What does he mean by that?
A lot of countries already have laws that require critical infrastructure operators to protect their systems from things like cyber attacks. But Gilding argues that those laws need to be updated to specifically address the unique challenges of high-risk AI.
So making companies responsible for making sure the AI they use is secure and that it doesn't threaten national security.
Exactly. It's about making these considerations part of the law, not just hoping that companies will do the right thing on their own.
This is getting pretty complicated. Global standards, international partnerships, legal reforms. It's a lot to think about.
It is, but we have to think about it. The stakes are too high to ignore these challenges. And while governments and corporations have a big role to play, individuals can make a difference too.
Which brings us to Gilding's point about individual responsibility. It's easy to feel helpless when you're talking about these huge global issues. What can any of us do?
We might not be able to change government policy or international agreements by ourselves, but our choices matter. The first thing we can do is educate ourselves. The more we know about AI and its implications, the better decisions we can make as consumers, voters, and citizens.
Knowledge is power. But what else can we do besides just staying informed?
We can support organizations that are working to promote responsible AI and advocating for ethical guidelines. There are a lot of groups out there doing great work, and they need our support.
So putting our money where our mouth is, supporting the groups that share our values, anything else?
We can use our voices to speak up and push our elected officials to take these issues seriously. Contact your representatives, write letters to the editor, get involved in public discussions, make some noise about the importance of responsible AI.
It's good to remember that we're not powerless. We can have an impact on how this technology develops. Now we've spent a lot of time talking about espionage and sabotage and foreign interference, but we haven't really touched on that third category, generative AI. Given how fast it's evolving and how much potential it has, that seems like something we should explore further.
You're right, generative AI is where things get really interesting, and maybe even a little scary. We're talking about systems like large language models that can generate text that sounds like a human wrote it. They can write different kinds of creative content, translate languages, and answer your questions. Think of ChatGPT, but on a much bigger scale.
I play around with ChatGPT. And it's amazing what it can do. It feels like we're entering a whole new era of technology.
We are. And that's what makes generative AI so fascinating, but also potentially dangerous. As these systems get more advanced, they raise even more ethical and security questions. And that brings us back to the importance of global collaboration and responsible development. We need to make sure these powerful tools are used for good and don't make existing inequalities worse or create new ones.
We need to make sure we're not creating problems we can't solve. So let's talk about some of the specific challenges with generative AI. What are some of the things we need to be worried about?
Well, I think one of the big worries with generative AI is that it can be misused. I mean, we're already seeing deepfakes online, videos that are so well made, it's hard to tell if they're real or not.
Yeah, and as these systems get even more sophisticated, it'll be even easier to create fake news,
Hmm.
propaganda, even impersonate people online. Imagine a world where you can't trust anything you see or hear online because it could all be made up by AI.
That's kind of terrifying, honestly. We're already dealing with so much misinformation and division, and this could just make it so much worse. That's a real concern. It's why we need to develop ways to detect these fakes
Yeah.
and teach people how to tell what's real and what's not.
We need to be able to navigate this crazy information landscape. What about bias in these systems? We know AI is trained on these huge data sets. And if those data sets are biased, the AI will be biased too, right?
Absolutely. If we're not careful,
Yeah.
we could end up with AI systems that discriminate against certain groups,
Yeah.
making existing inequalities worse, or even creating new ones. We need to find ways to make sure these systems are fair, unbiased, and accountable.
So it's not just about the technology itself, it's about the values that are built into it.
Exactly. We need to be talking about ethics and responsibility now, before it's too late.
We can't just hope that technology will solve all our problems. We have to actively shape it to match our values. And that brings us back to what Gilding said about individual responsibility. We've talked about educating ourselves, supporting good organizations, and speaking out for responsible AI. What else can we do?
I think one of the most important things is to be thoughtful about the technology we use. When you're choosing a product or service, think about the ethics of the company behind it. Do they have a good track record with AI? Are they transparent about their data practices? Do they care about user privacy and security? By making informed choices, we can show companies that we value these things.
Voting with our wallets, supporting the companies that are doing the right thing.
Right. And by talking about these issues with our friends and family, we can help raise awareness and create a demand for ethical AI.
This has been an incredible deep dive. We started by looking at the risks of AI from authoritarian states, especially China, and we ended up discussing the bigger ethical challenges that we all face as AI gets more powerful and becomes part of our everyday lives.
It's a complicated issue for sure, but I think Gilding's framework gives us a good way to approach it. By being balanced, focusing on the biggest risks, and working together globally, we can use AI for good, while protecting our values and security.
I totally agree. And as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with this thought. We all have a part to play in shaping the future of AI, whether it's learning more about it, supporting organizations doing good work, speaking out for ethical guidelines, or making smart choices as consumers. Our actions matter. The future of AI isn't set in stone. We're all creating it together. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.